What if I told you that a simple inheritance lie could become the catalyst for divine intervention that transforms broken family relationships forever? My name is Sarah, and I thought I knew my parents. For 28 years, I believed they were good Christian people who raised me with love and biblical values. But when my grandmother passed away last spring, everything I thought I knew about my family crumbled like dust in the wind, revealing deceptions so deep that only Jesus himself could expose the truth and heal what seemed irreparably broken. It started with a phone call on a Tuesday morning that would change everything. Mom's voice was different, cold, almost businesslike, stripped of the warmth I'd known my entire life. "Sarah, we need to talk about Grandma's will. Can you come over tonight?" My heart raced as memories flooded back. Grandma had always promised me her house, the little Victorian cottage where I'd spent countless summers learning to bake her famous apple pies, listening to her stories about great-grandfather's farm, and discovering what it meant to have unshakable faith in Jesus Christ. When I arrived at my parents' house that evening, the atmosphere felt heavy, oppressive. Dad wouldn't even look at me, his eyes fixed on some invisible point beyond my shoulder. Mom sat rigid in her chair, holding a manila envelope like it contained poison. The silence stretched between us like a chasm, filled with unspoken tensions I couldn't quite understand. Finally, Mom spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Honey, there's been a misunderstanding about the inheritance. Grandma left everything to us. You get nothing." The words hit me like a physical blow, stealing the breath from my lungs. Nothing. But Grandma had promised me the house just months before she died. She'd held my hands in hers, those weathered fingers that had taught me to knead bread and fold prayer hands, and said with absolute certainty, "This house will be yours, sweet girl. It's already written in stone." I stammered, trying to process what I was hearing, but she promised me. Dad cut me off with a sharp wave of his hand, his first movement since I'd arrived. "There's no discussion, Sarah, the will is clear. She left everything to us." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Grandma's final words to me, the certainty in her eyes, the way she'd squeezed my hands as if transferring something sacred between us. Something felt wrong, terribly wrong, like a discordant note in what should have been a symphony of family love. I found myself in my kitchen at 3 in the morning, making coffee with trembling hands and crying into my palms. The familiar ritual brought no comfort. That's when everything changed, when Jesus entered my story in the most unexpected way. But would Sarah discover that her parents' deception was actually Jesus preparing divine intervention that would expose the truth and heal their fractured family beyond anything humanly possible? The plan of God for this family was about to unfold in the most miraculous way, revealing that sometimes the deepest betrayals become the doorways to the greatest redemptions. The morning light filtered through my kitchen window as I sat with my coffee, still reeling from the previous night's devastating conversation. My parents had been so adamant, so final about the inheritance, but something in their demeanor had felt rehearsed, like they were reading from a script they'd practiced until it sounded natural. I'd known these people my entire life, watched them navigate countless family crises with grace and wisdom, and this coldness was unlike anything I'd ever experienced from them. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through photos of Grandma and me at the house. In one picture from last Christmas, she was showing me her antique jewelry box, pointing to a small brass key tucked beneath the velvet lining. "This opens the safe, sweetheart. Everything important is in there," she'd said with a knowing smile. "All the documents that matter, all the secrets that need keeping." I'd forgotten about that conversation until now, but suddenly it felt significant. What was in that safe? And why hadn't my parents mentioned it during our discussion about the estate? As I sat there praying for guidance, asking Jesus to help me understand what was happening to my family, I felt a strange peace wash over me, like warm honey. It was as if someone had placed a gentle hand on my shoulder, and the kitchen seemed to grow brighter despite the early morning hour. The sunbeam streaming through the window created an almost ethereal glow, and I could swear I heard a voice whisper with tender authority, "Trust me, daughter, the truth will set you free, but first it must be revealed." I decided to drive to Grandma's house, following an impulse that felt divinely inspired. My parents had said they were handling all the estate matters, that I shouldn't concern myself with the details, but something in my spirit urged me to go. The house looked exactly the same, the white picket fence that Grandma had painted every spring, the rose garden she'd tended for 40 years with the devotion of a monk. the swing on the front porch where we'd shared so many conversations about faith, family, and the mysterious ways God works in our lives. Mrs. Henderson, the neighbor who'd been Grandma's closest friend for 2 decades, waved from her yard where she was tending her own garden. "Sarah, I'm so sorry about your grandmother. She talked about you constantly in those final months. Always said you were the light of her life, her greatest blessing." She paused, studying my face with concern. "I thought you'd be here more often, settling into your new house. Margaret was so excited about leaving it to you." My heart stopped. "My new house." The words came out as a whisper. Mrs. Henderson's eyes widened with confusion and concern. "Oh, honey, your grandmother told everyone in the neighborhood that the house was yours. She was so excited about leaving it to you, said she'd updated her will just last year to make sure everything was crystal clear. She even had me witness some papers." The elderly woman's face clouded with worry. "Didn't your parents tell you?" Between prayer-filled moments and a heart prepared for truth, this revelation would show how divine guidance was already changing everything. Jesus had secrets that neither Sarah nor her parents imagined, and the discovery waiting in that little Victorian cottage would shake the very foundations of their family dynamics in ways that would glorify God forever and expose deceptions that had been festering in darkness for far too long. My hands trembled as I inserted the familiar key into Grandma's front door, the same key she'd given me years ago for emergencies. Mrs. Henderson's words echoed in my mind. Grandma had told everyone the house was mine. If that was true, then why had my parents looked me in the eye and lied so convincingly? I stepped inside, breathing in the familiar scent of lavender sachets and old books that had always made this place feel more like home than my own apartment. The house was exactly as Grandma had left it, frozen in time, like a museum of memory. Her reading glasses still sat on the kitchen table beside her well-worn Bible, the pages soft from decades of faithful study. Her favorite coffee mug, the one with hand-painted roses that I'd given her for Mother's Day 10 years ago, sat clean and ready by the sink, as if she might return at any moment for her morning devotions. I touched these familiar objects, feeling her presence so strongly it brought tears to my eyes and made my chest ache with longing. I made my way to her bedroom, where the old oak dresser held her jewelry box, a family heirloom that had belonged to her mother before her. My fingers found the small brass key she'd shown me, and with reverential care, I opened the hidden compartment she'd revealed during our last Christmas together. Inside was a folded document with my name written across the top in Grandma's careful, elegant handwriting, the same script that had adorned countless birthday cards and letters of encouragement throughout my life. "Last Will and Testament of Margaret Rose Sullivan," the header read in formal legal font. My eyes scanned the pages with growing disbelief, and what I found made my blood run cold and my heart race with a mixture of vindication and horror. The will was dated just 8 months ago, bearing fresh signatures and official seals, and it was crystal clear in its intentions. "I leave my house, all my possessions, and the entirety of my estate to my beloved granddaughter, Sarah Michelle Patterson. She has been the joy of my life and the keeper of my heart, the daughter I never had, and the faithful companion who never left my side." But there was more. So much more that painted a picture I never could have imagined. Attached to the will was a letter addressed specifically to me, written in Grandma's familiar script. "My dearest Sarah, if you're reading this, then something has happened to the copies I gave your parents. I fear they may not honor my wishes, despite their promises to do so. In this safe, you'll find the original will, along with evidence of why I had to make this difficult decision. Your parents have been taking money from my accounts for years, thinking I didn't notice because of my age. I forgave them in my heart, but I couldn't let them have everything when you've been my faithful companion through every illness, every lonely day, every moment when faith seemed distant." The room began to spin as the full weight of betrayal crashed over me like a tsunami. My parents hadn't just hidden my inheritance, they'd been systematically stealing from Grandma for years while she was alive, taking advantage of her trust and her love. The woman who had raised me with stories of integrity and faith, who had taught me that honesty was the cornerstone of Christian character, had been betrayed by her own son and daughter. I fell to my knees beside her bed, sobbing and praying through my tears. "Jesus, what do I do with this? How do I face them knowing what I know?" That's when I felt it again, that presence in the room that had comforted me in my kitchen. The afternoon light streaming through her lace curtains seemed to shimmer and dance, creating patterns that spoke of divine intervention. I could swear I heard a voice, gentle but firm, filled with both justice and mercy. The truth will set them free too, daughter. This is not about punishment, it's about healing. Even the deepest wounds can be transformed into testimonies of my grace. Don't miss how this family miracle unfolds. Subscribe now and hit that bell. But what Sarah's parents were really hiding in their own house went far deeper than anyone could imagine. The complete truth about their deception was about to come to light, and it would change everything, revealing how Jesus can transform even the darkest family secrets into opportunities for redemption and restoration. I spent the next hour in Grandma's house, discovering documents that painted an increasingly devastating picture of my parents' financial situation and moral compromise. Bank statements showed regular transfers from Grandma's account to theirs of dollars over the past 3 years, escalating in frequency and amount as her health declined. There were also copies of bills they'd asked her to pay, claiming they were temporary hardships that had somehow become permanent arrangements, each request accompanied by promises to pay her back that were never fulfilled. But the most heartbreaking discovery was a series of letters Grandma had written but never sent, stored in a manila folder marked "For my heart only." They were addressed to my father, and they revealed the depth of her heartbreak in words that cut me to the core. "My dear son, I know you're struggling financially, and I've been more than happy to help you and your family. But when you asked me to change my will to leave everything to you instead of Sarah, I couldn't do it. She's been my companion through every illness, every lonely night, every doctor's appointment. She's earned this inheritance through love and faithfulness, not obligation or blood relation alone." One letter, dated just a month before her death, was particularly damning. "I saw how angry you got when I refused to change my will, how your face darkened with something I'd never seen before, but discovering that you've been taking money from my accounts without asking has broken my heart in ways I never thought possible. I've decided to hide the real will because I no longer trust what you might do with it. Sarah will find it when the time is right. Jesus will make sure of that, just as he makes sure all truth eventually comes to light." My grandmother had known everything. She'd known about the theft, about their manipulation, about their plans to steal my inheritance, and she'd endured it all in silence, choosing forgiveness over confrontation while still protecting what was rightfully mine. And she'd trusted Jesus to orchestrate the discovery of the truth at exactly the right moment. I felt overwhelmed by the weight of it all, not just the inheritance, money and property, but the realization that my parents had been living a lie for years, maintaining their Christian facade while systematically betraying the woman who had loved them unconditionally. As I drove home that afternoon, I prayed continuously, my words tumbling over each other as I asked for wisdom about how to handle this devastating revelation. I didn't want to destroy my family, but I couldn't pretend I hadn't discovered the truth. The stolen money, the hidden will, the years of calculated deception, it all felt too enormous for me to handle alone, like trying to carry a mountain on my shoulders. That evening, I sat in my kitchen again, the original will spread out on the table before me like evidence in a courtroom. I'd made copies and secured the original in my safety deposit box, but I still couldn't quite believe what I was seeing. My phone buzzed with a text from Mom. "How are you handling the news about the inheritance? We know it's disappointing, but we'll take good care of Grandma's things. Maybe we can give you some of her jewelry to remember her by." The casual cruelty of that message hit me like a physical slap. They weren't just hiding the truth, they were actually enjoying my supposed loss, offering me trinkets from what should have been my inheritance, like scraps thrown to a beggar. One typed and deleted, a dozen responses, each one angrier and more accusatory than the last. Finally, I managed to write something neutral. "We need to talk. All of us. Tomorrow night at 7. If you're loving this journey of transformation, hit that like button." As I sat there that night, staring at the evidence of my parents' betrayal, I felt that presence again, Jesus in my kitchen, filling the space with a peace that transcended my anger and hurt. His presence reminded me that this confrontation wasn't about revenge or even justice, it was about truth. And truth has the power to heal even the deepest wounds when it's delivered with love. Each prayer, each tear, was leading me deeper into divine territory where family healing hung in the balance like a prayer waiting to be answered by the God who sees all things, knows all secrets, and makes all things right in his perfect timing. Tomorrow would bring a reckoning, but tonight I would rest in the knowledge that Jesus was already preparing hearts for the miracle that was about to unfold. The next evening, I stood outside my parents' house, the copies of the will and bank statements secured in my purse like weapons I hoped I wouldn't have to use. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. But I also felt a strange the kind of supernatural peace that comes from knowing you're about to do something difficult but necessary, something that aligns with God's will, even when it feels impossibly hard. I prayed one more time before ringing the doorbell. Jesus, let this be about healing, not just justice. Let this be about restoration, not just truth. Mom answered the door with her practiced smile, the one she'd perfected for church social functions and neighborhood gatherings. Sarah, come in, sweetheart. Dad's in the living room. The endearment felt hollow now, knowing what I knew, like a coin that rings false when dropped on a hard surface. I followed her inside, noticing for the first time how they'd arranged themselves strategically. Dad in his recliner, like a judge on his throne. Mom, on the couch beside him in a show of united front, leaving me the single chair facing them both. It felt like a tribunal, carefully orchestrated to maintain their position of power. So, Dad said without looking up from his newspaper, his voice carrying that dismissive tone I'd heard him use with door-to-door salesmen. I hope you're not here to argue about the will again. We've told you how it is, and frankly, I'm surprised you'd question your grandmother's final wishes. His casual dismissal sparked anger in my chest like a match struck in darkness, but I remembered the presence I'd felt in my kitchen, the gentle guidance that had brought me to this moment. This wasn't about my anger, it was about truth having its day in court. I went to Grandma's house yesterday, I said quietly, watching their faces carefully for any flicker of panic or recognition. The newspaper crinkled as Dad's hands tightened, involuntarily on the edges. Mom's smile flickered like a candle in wind. I found some very interesting things in her safe, things I think you both know about. The silence in the room was deafening, heavy with unspoken guilt and barely contained fear. Mom recovered first, her voice pitched higher than usual with forced brightness. You went through her personal things, Sarah. That's completely inappropriate. We're handling the estate according to proper legal procedures. But I could see the panic dancing in her eyes, the way she glanced at Dad like a co-conspirator seeking reassurance. I found the real will, I said simply, pulling out the documents that would change everything. The one dated 8 months ago, the one that leaves everything to me. Dad's newspaper dropped to his lap with a rustle that sounded like autumn leaves. Mom's face went white as fresh snow. I also found the bank statements, showing the money you've been taking from her accounts. 3 years' worth of theft, documented in black and white. The mask slipped completely. Dad's face turned purple with rage and something that looked like desperate fear, and he shot up from his chair like a man possessed. You have no idea what you're talking about. Your grandmother was confused in her final months, probably suffering from dementia. That will isn't legally valid, and you have no right to make these accusations. But his voice shook like a leaf in a storm, and I could see the terror behind his bluster, the knowledge that his carefully constructed lie was crumbling. She wasn't confused when she wrote me this letter, I said, pulling out Grandma's final message, like a trump card played at exactly the right moment. She knew exactly what was happening. She knew you were stealing from her, and she knew you'd tried to hide her real will. She forgave you, but she couldn't trust you. Mom started crying, then not the gentle tears of grief I'd expected, but the ugly, desperate sobs of someone caught in a web of their own making. We didn't have a choice, Sarah. The medical bills from your father's surgery, the mortgage payments, the credit card debt. We were going to lose everything. Mom had so much money just sitting there in her accounts, more than she could ever spend. We told ourselves we were just borrowing against our inheritance. So you stole it, I said, my voice steady despite the hurricane of emotions raging in my heart. And then you tried to steal my inheritance too, looking me in the eye and lying about Grandma's final wishes. The revelation was overwhelming. The choice between family loyalty and spiritual truth would determine if Jesus could heal these wounds that ran deeper than any of us had imagined. She stood at the crossroads of destiny's faith and risk everything, or choose silence and lose her soul to the darkness of complicity and enablement. Dad exploded like a volcano that had been building pressure for years. We raised you, we fed you, clothed you, paid for your college education. Don't we deserve something for all those years of sacrifice? His face was purple with rage and indignation, and I saw him clearly for what he really was. Not the faithful Christian man I'd thought I knew, but someone who justified theft with entitlement, who twisted love into a transaction with interest rates. You deserve honesty, I said, standing my ground despite the fury radiating from him like heat from a furnace. You deserved to be asked for help instead of just taking what wasn't yours. And I deserved to know the truth about Grandma's will instead of being lied to in my moment of grief. Mom wiped her eyes with a tissue that came apart in her shaking hands, her voice bitter with years of suppressed resentment. You were always her favorite. You know, she never really cared about us, only about her precious Sarah. We were just the caretakers, the ones who dealt with her medical appointments and grocery shopping, while you swooped in for weekend visits and got all the credit. The jealousy in her voice was shocking, revealing depths of resentment I'd never suspected. Is that what this is about? You're angry that she loved me? I felt that presence again, that gentle guidance that had been with me since this whole ordeal began, stronger now than ever before. She loved you too. The letters prove it. She forgave you for taking the money, but she couldn't trust you with the inheritance because you'd proven you couldn't be trusted. Forgave us. Dad's voice cracked like ice breaking on a frozen pond. She knew. The fight went out of him suddenly, and he collapsed back into his chair like a deflated balloon. She knew what we were doing, and she never said anything. I pulled out another letter, one I'd saved for this exact moment, the one that would either break their hearts or heal them. She wrote this to you, Dad, but never sent it. She said she understood you were struggling, but she was heartbroken that you never asked for help. She was devastated that you felt you had to steal from her, instead of trusting her to take care of you out of love. As I read Grandma's words aloud, her love for her son, her disappointment in his choices, her hope that he would find a way back to integrity, both of my parents broke down completely. The anger and defensiveness crumbled like a house built on sand, replaced by shame so deep it seemed to fill the room like floodwater. We were so scared, Mom whispered through her tears. We'd made such terrible financial decisions, and the debt kept growing like cancer. When Mom offered to help with a few bills, it felt like salvation, but then it became easier to ask, and then to just take without asking. And we told ourselves she had more than she needed anyway. And when she got sick, Dad added, his voice hollow with self-loathing, we convinced ourselves we were just securing our future, that we deserved something for all the caregiving we'd done. We'd taken care of her for years while you lived your own life. He looked up at me, his eyes red with tears and something that might have been genuine remorse, but stealing from her. Lying to you. This isn't who we wanted to be. This isn't who we raised you to believe we were. The room felt heavy with confession and regret, but also with something else, the presence of divine grace moving through our brokenness like light penetrating darkness. I could feel something shifting, something bigger than just the three of us, something that felt like the very hand of God reaching down to touch our wounded family. There's something else, I said softly, reaching for the final document that would either destroy us completely or begin our healing. Grandma left instructions about what to do if this happened. She set aside money specifically for your debts. She wanted to help you, but she wanted you to ask for forgiveness, first from me, from her memory, and from God. Share this story with someone who needs hope. Both of my parents looked at me with wonder and shame, as if seeing me clearly for the first time in years. With hearts united through the grace of Jesus, we faced a future where divine love would have the opportunity to conquer all the obstacles that had driven us apart. If only we were brave enough to choose healing over pride. The conversation that followed was the most honest one we'd had in years, maybe in our entire relationship. Dad admitted that the financial pressure had been crushing him like a weight he couldn't lift, that he'd felt like a complete failure as a provider and protector. The medical bills from his heart surgery had been overwhelming, and instead of declaring bankruptcy or asking for help, he'd chosen pride and deception. Mom confessed that she'd been consumed with jealousy over my relationship with Grandma for years, convincing herself that I was the favored grandchild who didn't deserve special treatment. I thought if we could just have the house, she said, staring at her hands, we could sell it and pay off our debts, start fresh somewhere new. But deep down, I knew it was wrong. I knew Mom wanted you to have it. I just couldn't stand the thought of you getting everything while we struggled. Why didn't you just tell me you were in financial trouble? I asked, genuinely puzzled by their choice to deceive rather than seek help. I would have helped. We could have figured something out together, as a family. Dad shook his head, looking older than his 62 years. Pride, I guess. Stupid, sinful pride. I didn't want my daughter to know what a mess I'd made of everything. I wanted to be the strong father, the provider, the man who had everything under control. Instead, I became a thief who stole from his own mother. The weight of their confession hung in the air like incense, but I felt that familiar presence guiding me toward what came next. This was the moment of decision, the crossroads where we would either choose healing or allow wounds to fester into permanent scars. Grandma knew this would happen, I said, pulling out the final document from her safe. She knew you were too proud to ask for help, and she knew you'd be tempted to take more than she'd freely given, so she made preparations for this exact moment. I unfolded the letter addressed to all three of us, written in her careful script. My dear family, if Sarah is reading this to you, then the truth has finally come to light, and I am rejoicing in heaven that honesty has prevailed. I want you to know that I forgive you completely for taking the money. I understand desperation, and I understand pride, but I also understand that families are healed through honesty, not deception, through confession, not cover-ups. I've left the house to Sarah because she's earned it through love and faithfulness, through being present in ways that matter more than duty or obligation. But I've also set aside $50,000 specifically for your debts, money that comes with only one condition. You must ask for forgiveness from each other, from my memory, and from God, and you must commit to rebuilding your relationship with my granddaughter on a foundation of truth. The silence in the room was profound, filled with the weight of grace offered freely to people who knew they didn't deserve it. Mom was crying again, but these were different tear stares of relief and overwhelming gratitude. Dad looked stunned, as if he couldn't process the magnitude of mercy being extended to him. She forgave us, he whispered, his voice filled with wonder. Even after everything we did, everything we stole and lied about, she forgave us. That's what love does, I said, feeling the truth of it resonate in my bones like a tuning fork, struck true. It forgives, it provides, it makes a way where there seems to be no way, and it never gives up on people, even when they've given up on themselves. As we sat there in that living room, surrounded by years of hurt and deception, I felt something miraculous beginning to happen. The presence that had been with me since that night in my kitchen was here too, filling the space between us with something that felt like hope rising from ashes, like resurrection morning after the darkest Friday in history, with hearts united through grace that none of us deserved but all of us desperately needed. We faced a future where love would have the chance to conquer all the obstacles that had driven us apart. The healing didn't happen overnight, but it began that very evening in ways that still take my breath away. Dad got down on his knees right there in the living room and asked for my forgiveness with tears streaming down his face. Mom held my hands and apologized for years of jealousy and resentment that had poisoned her heart against me. We all cried together, mourning not just Grandma's death, but the loss of trust, the waste of years, and the pain we'd caused each other through our choices. Over the following weeks, we began the painstaking work of rebuilding our relationship from the ground up. Dad showed me all their financial records, holding nothing back, opening their entire financial life for my inspection. The debt was even worse than I'd imagined: medical bills from Dad's heart surgery that insurance hadn't covered, credit card debt that had spiraled completely out of control, and a second mortgage on their house that threatened to destroy their retirement dreams. I was so ashamed, Dad admitted, as we sat in his study one evening, going through page after page of financial documentation. I'd always been the one who had everything together, who could provide for his family and solve any problem with hard work and determination. When everything started falling apart, when the bills kept coming and the debt kept growing, I didn't know how to ask for help without admitting I'd failed. Using Grandma's generous gift, we paid off their debts completely within a month. But more importantly than the financial relief, we established entirely new patterns of communication and transparency. Every Sunday, we began having dinner together, not just the three of us, but extended family members who had heard about our reconciliation and wanted to be part of the healing. We started each meal with prayer, thanking Jesus for the gift of forgiveness and the opportunity to start over with clean slates and open hearts. The house, my house, now became a gathering place for healing that extended far beyond our immediate family. I moved in 3 months after Grandma's passing, and it quickly became clear that God had much bigger plans for the space than just providing me with a beautiful home. Mom started coming over twice a week to help me tend Grandma's garden, and those afternoons became sacred times of conversation and healing. Dad began teaching me about home repairs and maintenance, skills he'd learned from his own father, and our Saturday morning projects became opportunities for the kind of father-daughter bonding we'd never experienced. "You know," Mom said one afternoon, as we were planting new roses in Grandma's memory garden, "I understand now why Mom left this house to you. You're not just inheriting her possessions, you're inheriting her heart for bringing family together, her gift for creating a home where people feel loved and accepted." The transformation was remarkable and undeniable. Dad, freed from the crushing weight of financial stress and the burden of maintaining lies, became the gentle, faithful man I remembered from childhood. Mom, no longer consumed by jealousy and resentment, rediscovered the joy of being a mother and, soon, a grandmother when my brother announced his wife's pregnancy, and I learned that forgiveness wasn't just about letting go of hurt, it was about creating space for love to grow in soil that had been prepared by pain. 6 months after that terrible night when they'd lied about the inheritance, we held Grandma's official memorial service in the garden she'd loved so much. Family members came from 3 states to celebrate her life and witness the miracle of our restored relationship. The service was a testimony to the power of grace to heal even the deepest wounds. "She would be so proud," my aunt whispered as she watched Dad and me working together to set up chairs for the service. "She always said family was worth fighting for, worth forgiving for, worth believing in, even when hope seemed impossible." Our story through Jesus had become the foundation of something beautiful and lasting, hearts united in ways that transformed not just our own lives but touched everyone who witnessed our journey from deception to redemption, from brokenness to wholeness. The memorial service was everything Grandma would have wanted and more. As family members shared stories and memories, a common theme emerged that painted a picture of Margaret Rose Sullivan as a woman who believed in second chances, who saw the best in people even when they couldn't see it in themselves, and who never gave up on the power of love to overcome any obstacle. My cousin Jennifer, who'd traveled from California specifically for the service, pulled me aside during the reception. "Sarah, I have to tell you something. When I first heard about the inheritance dispute and the family conflict, I was furious with your parents. I thought they were just being greedy and manipulative. But seeing you all together today, seeing the genuine love and forgiveness that's grown from this terrible situation, it's changed my perspective on some situations in my own family that I thought were beyond hope." That conversation opened my eyes to the ripple effects of our healing that were spreading far beyond our immediate family circle. Word had spread through our extended family and church community about what had happened, not as gossip, but as testimony to the power of grace. Instead of judgment and condemnation, we found understanding, support, and countless stories from others who had faced similar challenges. My Uncle Tom, Dad's younger brother, admitted that he'd been struggling with gambling debts for years, hiding his addiction from his wife and children out of shame. Seeing David get help and find forgiveness, he said with tears in his eyes, "It gives me hope that I can come clean and get help too." Within weeks, Tom was in counseling and attending Gamblers Anonymous meetings, and his marriage began the slow process of healing. The house became a sanctuary for family restoration in ways I never could have imagined. Every month, we hosted what we called Grandma's Dinners, gatherings where family members could share struggles, celebrate victories, and support each other through difficult times. The dining room table that had once been the site of quiet Sunday dinners for just Grandma and me, now regularly seated 12 people or more, filled with laughter, honest conversation, and the kind of deep fellowship that only comes when people feel safe to be vulnerable. "This is exactly what she always wanted," Mom said one evening, as we cleaned up after a particularly meaningful dinner where 2 family members had shared about their struggles with depression and found encouragement from the group. "She wanted the family to be together, to support each other through thick and thin. She just knew that sometimes it takes a crisis to bring people to their knees and show them what really matters." I began sharing our story at church, and the response was overwhelming in the best possible way. Pastor Williams asked me to speak to the entire congregation about forgiveness and family healing during a Sunday evening service. The sanctuary was packed, and afterwards, dozens of families approached me with their own stories of inheritance disputes, financial struggles, and broken relationships that seemed impossible to repair. "What you've experienced," Pastor Williams told me privately after the service, "is exactly what Jesus meant when he said the truth would set us free. Your grandmother's wisdom, your parents' genuine repentance, and your choice to forgive, it's all part of God's perfect plan for redemption and restoration. The speaking engagements led to other opportunities I never could have imagined. I was invited to write about our experience for the church newsletter, then for a regional Christian magazine that reached thousands of families. Each time I shared our story, I was amazed by how many people had similar experiences, families torn apart by money, pride, miscommunication, and the inability to ask for help when it was desperately needed. But the most profound moment came exactly 1 year after Grandma's death. Dad and I were working together in the garden, planting bulbs for spring flowers, when he stopped and looked at me with tears glistening in his eyes. "I need you to know something," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "The day you confronted us with the truth about what we'd done, that was the day I felt Jesus enter my heart in a way I'd never experienced before. I'd been going through the motions of faith for years, attending church and saying the right words, but I wasn't really surrendered to Him. That night, when I saw the depth of my sin and the magnitude of grace being offered anyway, I finally understood what it meant to be broken before God and made whole by His love. Standing at the crossroads of eternity, sharing our story and inspiring generations, or keeping the blessing private, I knew without question that our journey was meant to be shared with anyone who would listen. Anyone who needed hope that broken families could be healed." A year and a half after that life-changing confrontation, I stood in my kitchen, the same kitchen where Jesus had first appeared to me in my moment of deepest desperation and confusion. The morning light streamed through the windows, illuminating dozens of family photos that now covered the refrigerator and nearby walls. Pictures of Sunday dinners, gardening projects, holiday celebrations, and milestone moments told the visual story of our restoration in ways that words could never fully capture. The phone rang, and I smiled when I saw Mom's name on the caller. I did, marveling at how natural and joyful these daily conversations had become. "Good morning, sweetheart. Dad and I were wondering if you'd like to come over for lunch today. We're making Grandma's famous pot roast recipe, and your brother's family is coming with the new baby." "I'd love that," I said, feeling my heart swell with gratitude for the simple blessing of a family invitation extended in love. "Should I bring anything special?" "Just yourself and that photo album you've been working on. Dad wants to see the pictures from last week's dinner party, and we want to show the baby pictures to little Emma." As I hung up the phone, I felt that familiar presence, the one that had guided me through the darkest moments of our family crisis and had never left my side. Jesus had been there in my kitchen that night when I felt so alone and betrayed. He'd been there when I discovered the painful truth about my parents' deception. And he'd been there when we chose forgiveness over revenge, healing over bitterness, and love over the easy path of estrangement. The inheritance had been about so much more than money, property, or even justice. It had been about legacy, the kind of legacy that can't be written in a legal will or stored in a bank vault. Grandma had left us something far more valuable than her house or her savings account or any material possession. She'd left us a blueprint for redemption, a path back to each other, and a living testimony to the power of divine love to heal the deepest wounds and restore the most broken relationships. With hearts united through the eternizing grace of Jesus, our family's restoration revealed that the inheritance dispute was just the beginning of something much greater, a legacy of forgiveness that would impact not just our immediate family, but generations to come, and countless other families who would hear our story and find hope for their own seemingly impossible situations. If this transformation of family healing through Jesus blessed your heart and strengthened your faith, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel for more miraculous stories of God's redemptive power. Share this with someone who needs healing in their own family relationships, and hit that notification bell so you never miss how Jesus continues to work miracles in ordinary families. Comment Amen if Jesus touched your heart through our journey from deception to divine redemption. Remember, in God's infinite love, where families are healed and hearts restored, there's always another story waiting to unfold of Jesus transforming family pain into divine purpose. Until the next testimony of His wonderful grace, keep believing that no family is too broken for God's healing touch. No relationship is too damaged for His restoration, and no inheritance is more valuable than the legacy of forgiveness that Jesus offers to every heart willing to receive it and every family brave enough to choose love over pride.